The tune is as familiar as the uniforms, but don't let that fool you. Despite appearances, these are not British Grenadiers, but Canadian facsimiles correct to the last gleaming toe cap. They're trooping the colour at Government House in Ottawa, and loyal Canadians are here for the occasion. As if to complete the illusion, the parade ground doubles as a cricket pitch. The Canadian Grenadiers circumnavigate the wicket. It is the 110th birthday of the Canadian Confederation, but as the band plays on, many wonder how much longer the maple leaf will fly over 10 united provinces. The symbol of the turmoil that may rend that union asunder is the fleur-de-lis of Quebec province. Jean-Baptiste Day in Montreal was a time for Quebec's 80% French-speaking population to assert their national identity. It is this avowal of their determination to be French that threatens Canada's union. A French language bill presently before the Quebec Parliament is seen by many as a step towards eventual separation and independence. Premier Rene, a populist leader and declared separatist, explains the nationalist mood.
I've said before, dramatizing a little bit, that it was a little bit like a Rhodesian situation. In other words, let's say a speak white minority ruling over the natives. Let's say that was over dramatization, but I think it gives a good idea. For instance, the majority in Quebec, 80% and more, is French. And yet federal findings of a few years back, which have been confirmed recently, say that in the totem pole of incomes and promotion inside Quebec, I'm not talking about the whole of Canada, inside Quebec, apart from the really native population, in other words, the Eskimos and the Indians, the lowest people in that totem pole happen to be the 80% majority of French people in Quebec. Now, all of that is the background for Bill 1 and for what in English is called separatism, in other words, the option for self-government in Quebec.
Premier Lévesque and his ruling party Québécois look to the young for their strongest support. It is given willingly. But on Jean-Baptiste night, not everyone had time for politics. The language bill, known originally as Bill 1, but now since the government guillotine discussion as Bill 101, would make French the official language of the province. Because French would supersede English in the business world, the bill puts economic power into the hands of the French majority. Quebec is very, very French. To the visitor, the freeway symbolizes Quebec's difference. The trucks and the cars are pure North America, but the signs are French. The French in France have looked down on their transatlantic cousins, but they in turn have succeeded in preserving a style of life which owes more to Parisian chic than American brashness. In the tomato ketchup desert of North American cooking, Quebec is a gastronomic oasis. Here, amazingly, the hot dog does not reign supreme, and flavor is not something to be shaken from a bottle. The housewives prefer the market stall to the plastic-wrapped and plastic-flavored hygiene of the supermarket. It all adds up to a unique way of life whose preservation hardly seems to need the help of legislation. But the nationalist mood asserts the logic that the majority should control the purse strings. The French came to what is now the eastern seaboard of Canada in 1534. They named it New France, fought with the Indians, and prospered. As every schoolboy ought to know, their rule ended with the fall of Quebec City to the army of General Wolfe in 1759. Montreal students, in the guise of 18th century French troops, reenact for the tourists the Battle of Quebec. Their jaunty confidence reflects the complacency of the men who once defended the city. All through the summer of 1759, Wolfe's army lay siege to Quebec. but as winter approached, seemed no nearer to a conclusive victory. The French waited for the ice that would drive the British ships from the St. Lawrence. On September 13th, Wolfe struck. On the plains of Abraham, Wolfe won Canada for the British and lost his life. The Scots quickly put aside their bagpipes for ledgers. Today, the names dominating Montreal's business community read like the roll call of the gathered clans. While the British prospered in the world of business, the French stuck to the land and their traditions. Part of that heritage is in the kitchen. Michel Nantel prepares Sunday lunch for a family gathering in a weekend retreat in the mountains outside Montreal. Husband Roger, a high-powered public relations consultant in the city, leaves the cooking in safe hands to offer homage to the wines. "3,000 miles of sea are spanned by a single Gallic gesture." The scene could hardly be more French, yet for all that they cling to tradition, do not French Canadians suffer an identity crisis?
I don't.
No.
But we have collectively, in the sense that for 3 centuries we had, for 2 centuries since the British conquest, we had to be professional schizophrenic. There weren't any problems for the whole period until 30 years ago that we French-speaking Canadians would be busy cutting down the trees, tilling the land, raising cows and pigs, while the Anglophone or the Anglo-Canadians were busy running the railroads. It's only when my forefathers came back to Montreal, which they settled themselves first, and had to get active on the economic and business front, that the interface happened, and then the conflict began. And it's only then, 30, 20 years ago, that people like, well, more than that, I would say 40 years ago, that my father realized that being called Nantel, he couldn't go past a certain point in industry and commerce and finance. He would train young people coming out of university who happened to be called Jones or Smith, and very quickly they would become his bosses. And he could not become a boss because of the fact that he was French. Now, let's not kid ourselves. There was discrimination through the use of language.
The drift from the land to the cities after the Second World War accelerated French discontent. Roger Nantel charts the progress of nationalism.
At the time of the conquest, most of the, I would say, literate or aristocratic elements of the French society of that period jumped back on their ships like rats and flew back to France or sailed back to France. What was left here was the clergy and the rural classes. Therefore, the scholarity or the education level of French Canadians at that time was, generally speaking, lower than what you would meet in any other well-constituted society. And French Canadians tended, and they were encouraged in that vein by the clergy. They were encouraged to stick to the land. Education was not necessarily a good thing. Being well educated was not necessarily an advantage. But it turned out to be the salvation, in a way, ironically enough. It turned out to be the salvation of French Canada, because we won the Battle of the Cradle. The battle of the cradle, a battle which I'm trying to take part in now.
The religion, the priest, and all that shit, you know, they kept us so within ourselves, you know, so much at the low level, you know, we couldn't. You know, it was bad, you know, like if somebody was a bright person that could go to a very good university outside, you know, that wasn't a very good image, you know, in your family if you were doing that. I'm not talking about, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, but it's much further than that. But it, you know, it kept on going like that.
But in the end, you're saying that those are the very things that in fact kept the community together.
Yes, it did. In
some ways,